Chapter 1. The First Encounter. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of atmospheric re-entry as it descended into the atmosphere of a distant, barely charted planet in the midway sector of the galaxy. The stars outside the cockpit window were nothing but pinpricks of light, distant and indifferent. Inside the cockpit, however, all was chaos. Red alert lights flashed on the instrument panels, a cacophony of alarms blaring as the ship pitched and lurched through the storm clouds. The sudden descent had been anything but smooth, and the pilot, Michael Kincaid, was doing everything he could to keep us in one piece. For years, I had been a cargo pilot, nothing glamorous. I was used to hauling supplies and running errands between outposts, barely scraping by, but I had seen my fair share of emergencies. Nothing, however, had prepared me for this. My ship, the Catalyst, had been tasked with delivering an important package to a research station on the fringes of this uncharted world, a planet designated only by its coordinates and a vague mention of its significance in star maps. The station was isolated beyond the reach of regular communication, and I had no idea what to expect. The package was strange, heavy, and clearly well-guarded, marked with the symbol of a galactic research corporation known for their cutting-edge research into alien technology. But nothing about the station or the package seemed to prepare me for the one thing I found on the other side of the storm. The Catalyst finally lurched to a violent halt as it landed, the impact shaking me hard enough to send my coffee flying across the cockpit. I muttered a curse, wiping my face, then grabbed the manual override to open the landing gear. Outside, the sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the air had a metallic, humid scent. The ground seemed to rumble, and I wasn't sure if it was the weather or something deeper below. But there was no time to dwell on that. I had a delivery to make. I gathered my things, slinging on my jacket and glancing at the control panel. The ship had endured the storm, but there were some systems that had taken damage. The communications array was down, and the landing gear was slightly bent from the rough re-entry. Still, we had made it through. That was the most important thing, right? You survived. You made the drop. Now you get paid, you grab a drink, and you move on to the next one. The cargo hold was filled with several sealed crates. The one marked with the Research Corporation's insignia was the heaviest, sealed in a reinforced container that hummed with energy. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I touched it. It felt wrong somehow, as if there was something waiting to be discovered, something hidden inside it. It wasn't my job to ask questions. I was just the delivery guy, and I had learned a long time ago that curiosity could be a dangerous thing. So, I pushed it aside and carried the crate toward the exit hatch, where I had been instructed to meet the researchers waiting on the surface. The door hissed open with a groan of hydraulics, and a rush of cool, damp air greeted me. I stepped out onto the cracked, gray stone of the planet's surface, taking in the desolate landscape. The research station was a small compound, its buildings constructed from durable materials designed to withstand the harsh, unpredictable conditions of this planet. The sky above was an ominous shade of green, with lightning flickering in the distance, the storm still hanging heavily in the air. Everything about this place felt alien, not just because it was a new world, but because it seemed as though it was waiting for me. I took a few steps forward, my boots crunching over the dry earth, the crate in my arms growing heavier with each step. The station's lights flickered in the distance, and I saw figures moving in the shadows, probably the researchers who had been waiting for the package. They didn't seem to be in a hurry, which made me wonder if they even cared what was inside this particular crate. There was something cold and detached about the way they worked, as if their lives were consumed by the research, as if they were already living in a world removed from everything else. I walked up to the entrance, the heavy door sliding open with a soft hiss. Inside was dimly lit, the air sterile and cool. The walls were lined with equipment and computers, their screens filled with endless data streams and holographic projections. There was a large central table in the middle of the room, around which 3 people stood waiting for me. One was a man, tall and thin, his face lined with stress and exhaustion, his eyes sharp and calculating. The other 2 were women, both wearing the same gray jumpsuits, their expressions unreadable. One of them was slightly taller than the other, her posture regal despite the casual nature of her outfit. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes were an arresting shade of violet. They gleamed with intelligence, and there was an almost unnatural sharpness to them, as if she could see through me. "Captain Kincaid, I assume," the man said, his voice even but with a tinge of impatience. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "We've been expecting you. I trust the journey was uneventful." I shook his hand, but my attention kept flicking to the taller woman. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her gaze fixed firmly on me. Her violet eyes were intense, almost unnerving. There was something magnetic about her, a quiet power in her presence that made me feel out of place, as though I had stepped into a world where I didn't belong. "Uneventful enough," I replied, my voice steady despite the sense of discomfort growing in my chest. "Delivery's in good condition. Here's the crate." I placed it gently on the table, my eyes still lingering on her. She didn't move, didn't say anything, but her eyes, those violet eyes, never left mine. "Thank you," the man said, clearly relieved. "We'll take it from here. You're free to rest, or if you prefer, you can leave immediately. Your job is done. You'll be compensated as agreed." But the woman, she hadn't spoken yet. Her lips parted slightly as if she were about to say something, but then she paused, her gaze still locked onto me. There was a long, drawn-out silence before she finally spoke, her voice calm, almost distant. "I am curious about something, Captain." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She took a step closer, her posture still regal, her eyes intense, and she spoke in a tone that was almost too soft, as though she were pondering something before asking. "How did you know?" I frowned, not understanding. "Know what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her violet eyes searched my face, as if she were reading me, trying to decipher my every expression. The air between us seemed to thicken, and suddenly, I realized that it wasn't just curiosity in her gaze, it was something more, something that felt almost like an interrogation. "How did you know?" she repeated slowly. "That I was waiting for you to say it." The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What was she talking about? I had barely said a word to her, let alone anything that might have led her to believe that I had been waiting to say something. But the way she was looking at me, as if she had expected something, made me pause. Something was happening here, something I didn't quite understand, but something that felt important. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched on between us, and before I could say anything, she took a step closer to me. "You don't know," she said quietly. "But you felt it, didn't you? When you walked into the room, when you first saw me, you knew. I could see it in your eyes." She stopped, her gaze unwavering. "You told me my eyes were beautiful. Do you know why that matters?" The words hung in the air, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Had I really said that? I didn't remember. It had just come out, spontaneous, almost as if I had been compelled to speak them. The woman's expression softened for a moment, and I noticed a flicker of something relief, perhaps cross her face. "Your eyes," I repeated, still trying to understand the situation. I mean, they are beautiful." And with that, the woman was left speechless. The woman stood before me, her violet eyes wide in surprise, as if my simple words had caused a ripple she hadn't anticipated. For a moment, she didn't speak, and the silence stretched between us like a heavy curtain. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I hadn't meant to say it, not really. But the words had spilled out on their own, and there they were, hanging in the air between us, full of a strange, unspoken meaning. I had simply commented on the most noticeable thing about her, the striking color of her eyes, but now that I had said it, I realized it was more than just an innocent observation. Her reaction was unexpected, and it made my stomach twist with a kind of unease I couldn't shake. She took a step back, her eyes still locked onto mine, and for the first time since I had arrived at the station, she spoke. "You are different, Captain Kincaid," she said, her voice soft but laden with something else, a hint of awe, perhaps, or confusion. "I wasn't expecting you to notice." I felt a flicker of heat rise to my cheeks, unsure of what she meant. Was I being too forward? I had barely exchanged more than a few words with her, and yet here I was, caught in the pull of her gaze. "I didn't mean anything by it," I said quickly, trying to backpedal. "I just No," she interrupted gently, holding up a hand, silencing me. Her expression shifted, a subtle change that deepened the mystery surrounding her. "It's not that. It's just strange. We have spent so long in isolation, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. And yet here you are, someone who doesn't look at me as an alien, but as a person who sees something in me that others have never noticed. She paused, and her voice seemed to catch in her throat, a glimmer of vulnerability slipping through her calm exterior. Most people would be afraid of me, or dismissive of my kind. But you. Her gaze softened, and the weight of the moment settled into the air. You see me as someone worthy of admiration, someone who is human in some way. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had never considered the weight of how I had spoken to her, how, in that moment, I had treated her as an equal, not as an alien to be feared, or some curiosity to be studied, but as a person deserving of respect. The realization made my chest tighten with something I couldn't place guilt, perhaps, for not seeing her as I should have before, or maybe it was a flicker of something more personal, something deeper. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, I said, my voice quieter now, unsure of where this conversation was heading. I just dash. No, she said again, this time more firmly, her eyes softening as she reached out a hand toward me. You didn't. You've done something few others would even think to do. She paused, her fingers hovering just a few inches from mine. Thank you, Captain Kincaid. It means more to me than you can understand. There was an odd sense of finality in her tone, as if something profound had passed between us, something unspoken yet deeply felt. I couldn't quite place it, but her words echoed in my mind, swirling in the space between us like an invisible thread pulling us closer. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. The cargo hold, once a simple and functional space, now seemed to hum with a quiet tension, as if something was changing, something was shifting in the very fabric of this strange encounter. Before I could respond, the man who had greeted me earlier, the one with the calculating eyes, stepped forward, breaking the moment. His expression was unreadable, but there was a slight edge to his voice as he spoke. Captain Kincaid, we appreciate your timely arrival and your discretion with the cargo, he said, his eyes flicking from the woman to me. But now that you've completed your task, I'm afraid we must proceed with the next phase of our work. I turned to him, a bit startled by his sudden interruption, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been left unfinished. The woman's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, and I caught the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of her lips, though it quickly vanished. She turned away from me then, her attention shifting back to the table where the crate was being opened. The moment was over, as quickly as it had begun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The tension between us, the unspoken connection, seemed to hover in the air like a silent promise. And just as I began to contemplate what that might mean, the reality of the situation settled in. I had done my job. I had delivered the package. That was all I was supposed to do. But now, there was something else, something I couldn't ignore, even if I tried. The woman, with her violet eyes and her strange presence, had left a mark on me that I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with. The mystery of her, the enigma of her, had taken root in my mind, and I wasn't sure I could walk away from it, no matter how hard I tried. I glanced once more at the woman, who was now deep in conversation with the man, her face serious and intent on something far beyond my understanding. There was so much about her I didn't know, so much that remained hidden beneath the surface. Yet for the briefest of moments, I had seen a side of her that was raw, unguarded. And for the first time in a long time, I felt an unfamiliar sensation stirring within me, a curiosity I couldn't silence, a need to understand her, to learn more about who she was and why she had left such an indelible impression on me. I wasn't sure what the next step was. I wasn't sure what would happen after I left this station, after I returned to my life as just another cargo pilot. But I knew this. Something about this encounter had changed me, something I couldn't quite explain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman, with her otherworldly eyes, would somehow remain in my thoughts long after I left this place. Chapter 2. The Promise of Secrets. The day after my delivery, the research station seemed quieter than it had been when I first arrived. The bustle of work had shifted into a more purposeful, almost secretive rhythm. The Mandiar, Victor Lang, as he had introduced himself, had kept to his office for most of the day, presumably going over data or reviewing his notes on the strange cargo. The woman, whose name I still hadn't learned, spent much of her time with him. They had spoken in low tones, their conversations a mix of scientific jargon and cryptic remarks, much of which went over my head. But as I watched from a distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something important. I spent the day making small repairs on the catalyst, trying to keep my mind occupied, but all the while, my thoughts kept drifting back to the woman, to her eyes, to the way she had looked at me when I told her she was beautiful. I still didn't understand why it had affected her so much. People had told me I had a way with words, that I was charming when I needed to be. But this wasn't like any of those times. The woman's reaction had been genuine, almost vulnerable in a way that made my chest tighten. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't anticipated someone like me seeing her for what she was. And I couldn't help but wonder if I had somehow unlocked a part of her that no one else had bothered to look for. By evening, the storm outside had passed, leaving behind a thick fog that wrapped around the station like a shroud. The distant rumble of thunder had faded into nothingness, leaving the night eerily quiet. I had planned to leave the next morning, my job done, and the cargo delivered. But something kept me in place, something tethering me to the station, to her. I wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the mystery of her origins, the pull of her presence, or the strange connection I felt every time she looked at me. It wasn't until later that evening, as the fog thickened outside and the station grew darker, that I saw her again. She was standing near the main window, staring out at the mist-covered landscape, her face soft but contemplative. There was something peaceful about the way she stood there, as though the world outside didn't matter, as though she were lost in her thoughts. Without thinking, I approached her, my footsteps quiet on the metal floor. "Are you okay?" I asked, unsure if it was the right thing to say. She turned to face me, her violet eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time since we had met, she smiled. It wasn't the guarded, almost distant expression she had worn before. This was something real, something warm, and it sent a jolt through me. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. "Just thinking." I nodded, not knowing what to say next. The silence between us was comfortable, even if it was full of unspoken words. She glanced back out the window. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" I hesitated, the question feeling heavier than it should have. "I think so. I don't have any reason to stay." She turned back to me, her expression thoughtful, almost apologetic. "I understand. But before you leave, there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure why, but the way she said it made everything feel more important. I didn't know where this conversation was heading, but it seemed like the beginning of something I hadn't expected. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. "What do you need to tell me?" Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. "What I didn't say before," she began, her voice soft but firm. "The reason I reacted the way I did when you told me I was beautiful, it's because I've never been seen like that before. Not by anyone. Your words, they weren't just kind, they were the truth. And that truth has been lost to me for a long time." I wasn't sure what to say. Her words hung in the air, and in that moment, everything felt different, like the shift in the room had opened something new, something fragile between us. "I see you," I whispered, more to myself than to her, but she heard it all the same. And for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just curiosity or mystery, it was trust. A kind of quiet, unspoken promise that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. The words hung in the air between us like a fragile thread, each one carrying weight that neither of us had expected. I could feel my heart racing, an odd sense of anticipation building inside me. It wasn't just that she had trusted me with something so personal, something that seemed so deeply buried in her, but also the way she had shared it so freely. Something about her admission struck me. There was more beneath her calm demeanor, more than I had ever realized. The woman who had stood aloof, untouchable in her quiet authority, now seemed softer somehow. She had allowed herself to be seen, something I hadn't expected, or at least not so soon. Her eyes held mine for a long moment, the silence between us filled with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Finally, she took a slow breath, breaking the tension that had gathered in the room. "I never thought that anyone would look at me like that," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't understand, Captain Kincaid. I've lived so long in isolation, bound to a ship and to research, constantly being observed, never truly seen for who I am. But you saw me." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I said the only thing that felt natural. "You are seen," I said simply, my voice steady. Not just by me, but by anyone who looks closely enough. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something that wasn't just curiosity or caution, it was appreciation, maybe even a sense of relief. She exhaled, and her shoulders seemed to relax for the first time since we had met. She took a step closer, her presence somehow more inviting, more human, and less distant. For the first time, I felt like we were no longer two strangers in a sterile research facility, but two people bound by something shared, a moment, an unspoken understanding. I've spent my entire existence hiding parts of myself, she continued, her voice barely above a murmur. Even my people, the ones I came from, never truly understood me. They were all so focused on the mission, the purpose. I was always meant to be a tool, a weapon. But you made me feel human again, in a way no one else ever has. My chest tightened, an overwhelming mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. There was something profound in her words, something about the fragility of identity, about the desire to be acknowledged for more than just the role you played. I thought of my own life, spent bouncing from one mission to another, detached from everything. The idea of being seen, really seen, was something I hadn't even considered. But standing in that room, with her eyes, those impossible violet eyes focused on me, I realized how much I craved that same thing, connection. Maybe, I began slowly. We're all just looking for someone to see us for who we truly are. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. There was a moment of silence, and then, almost as if guided by the weight of the words we had exchanged, she stepped closer still. Her presence was overwhelming, and for a split second, I thought she might say something that would change everything. But instead, she just stood there, her gaze fixed on me, and I could see it now. The hesitation, the uncertainty. She wasn't just speaking from a place of personal loss. She was speaking from a place of longing, of having spent so long on a distant, isolated path, cut off from connection. The atmosphere between us shifted, thickening with the weight of the unsaid. I wanted to say something, to fill the space with words that could bridge the gap between us, but something inside me stilled, the words feeling insufficient for what was building between us. Instead, I stepped back, my hand brushing against the side of the table, a grounding movement that broke the tension. "We should go," I said, the simple words feeling oddly final, though I wasn't sure why. "There's still a lot we don't know, and we need to figure this out." She nodded, and for a moment, she seemed to lose the intensity in her gaze, as if returning to the focus of the mission, as if she had momentarily forgotten what had just transpired between us. She turned away from me, walking toward the door, but I couldn't stop the nagging feeling that something had just shifted. The words we'd exchanged, the things we'd both left unsaid, there was something undeniably powerful about them. And in that brief moment, I realized that our journey, whatever it was going to be, had become far more personal than I had anticipated. Chapter 3. Into the Abyss. The following days passed in a blur of activity. The research station, once a place of sterile routine and quiet, had come alive with a new energy. The research team was busy preparing the core, studying its inner mechanisms, and attempting to understand the alien technology that pulsed beneath the surface. The woman whose name, I now knew, was Lyra was at the center of it all, working tirelessly with the team, her violet eyes fixed on the data screens, her focus unwavering. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. There was an unspoken distance now, one that hung in the air whenever I was around her. It was as if our brief exchange had opened a door to something larger, something we weren't yet ready to confront. Despite the whirlwind of activity around the station, I couldn't help but feel out of place. I had been brought here for one purpose: to deliver the package. And that's what I had done. But now, with Lyra working alongside the researchers, digging deeper into the core's secrets, I felt like an outsider. My role in this story seemed insignificant, a mere footnote to the larger questions they were asking. I was just a pilot, a courier, someone who didn't belong in the orbit of these extraordinary discoveries. One evening, when the hum of the station was quieter, the researchers having retreated to their quarters for the night, I found myself wandering the hallways. The faint glow of the emergency lights cast long shadows along the metal walls. My footsteps echoed in the empty space, the silence around me almost oppressive. I wasn't sure why I was walking. Maybe it was the overwhelming need to clear my head, to escape the sense of uncertainty that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Or maybe it was the way Lyra's presence had begun to linger in my thoughts, the way she had so easily stepped into my life and made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. As I reached the far end of the station, I noticed the door to the research lab slightly ajar. A flicker of light seeped from the crack, and instinctively, I moved closer, curiosity driving me. Inside, the glow from the monitors illuminated Lyra's face, her expression fixed in concentration as she examined a series of readouts on the core's power output. She was alone, and for a brief moment, I considered turning back. But something in her posture, the quiet strength that radiated from her, kept me rooted to the spot. "Lyra," I called softly, my voice breaking the stillness. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine with that same intensity one had grown accustomed to. But this time, there was something else, something more human in her eyes. She smiled faintly, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. "Captain Kincaid," she said, her voice calm. But there was a trace of something softer there, something more personal. "I thought you'd be in your quarters by now. Is something wrong?" I shook my head, stepping into the room. "No, just couldn't sleep. I wanted to check in, see how things were going." She gestured to the monitors. "We've made some progress. The core is more responsive than we anticipated. I think we're on the verge of unlocking its true potential." Her voice, though steady, seemed to carry a hint of excitement, something she rarely allowed to show. I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. There was something in the way she said it, the underlying implication that the discoveries they were making weren't just for the betterment of science, they were for something much greater, something more personal to her. I didn't fully understand it, but I could sense it. It was as if she was driven by more than just curiosity about the alien technology. It was as if the core, the discoveries they were making, were tied to something she needed to unlock for herself. "Lyra, what is it you're really searching for?" I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out in the quiet of the room. "What's driving you?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't look away. She was calculating, considering whether to answer honestly. "It's not just about the technology," she finally said, her voice low. "It's about redemption. About reclaiming something that was lost, something that was stolen from my people. My home was destroyed by forces I can't control, and this is all that remains of us. I'm trying to bring back what was lost." There was a quiet intensity to her words that sent a chill down my spine. I had known that her mission wasn't simply about science, but I hadn't fully understood the depth of her personal stakes. She wasn't just a researcher or a survivor, she was the last of her kind, carrying the weight of her entire civilization's survival on her shoulders. And I had been the one who saw her, really saw her, when no one else had. The air between us thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just a cargo pilot anymore. I wasn't just here to drop off a package. I had become part of something far bigger, something that would change the galaxy forever. And whether I liked it or not, my path was now intertwined with Lyra's. As I stood there, looking at the woman before me, the weight of the galaxy seemed to settle on my shoulders. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Chapter 3: The Unraveling. The days that followed were marked by a deepening sense of urgency. Lyra's work with the core had accelerated. What had once seemed like a slow and meticulous process was now racing towards something I couldn't quite grasp. She had become consumed by it, her focus unrelenting. It was as though the core had become an extension of herself, a connection to her past that she couldn't quite understand, but couldn't let go of either. She barely slept, spending hours in the research lab, her face illuminated by the glow of the alien technology. I, too, found myself drawn into her world. The line between pilot and observer blurred as I spent more time at the station, helping where I could, offering whatever expertise I had. And with each passing day, the mystery of the core end of Lyra grew deeper. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit hallways of the station, I received a message, a simple, cryptic message. It was from a source I didn't recognize, but the words chilled me to my core. The core is not just a tool, it is a weapon. And Lyra is its key. Protect her, or everything will be lost. The words hung in the air, their meaning slowly sinking in. What had we uncovered? And why was Lyra the key? My gut told me that the path we were on, the mission we had started, was no longer just about alien technology. It was about something far more dangerous. The next day, The truth would unfold. But whether we were ready for it was something neither of us could answer. The message had struck me like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. A threat. It was clear that whoever had sent it knew more than they were letting on, and their cryptic warning only added to the mounting tension I had been feeling since the moment I landed on this planet. The core, this alien relic, was more than just a scientific marvel. It wasn't a simple piece of lost technology waiting to be unlocked. It was something far darker, something dangerous, and Lyra was at the center of it all. I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin, but the message echoed in my thoughts, pulling me deeper into a mystery that was quickly spiraling out of control. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was really happening here. That night, the station was quieter than usual, the usual hum of activity muted by the growing sense of dread that hung in the air. Lyra had spent the entire day in the lab, her focus unwavering as she worked with the core. I had been keeping my distance, trying to give her space, but the more I learned, the less I understood. What was her connection to the core? Why had she been chosen? And why was this alien technology so important that it seemed to consume her every waking moment? I found myself at the entrance to the lab, unable to stay away. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped inside. The cool, sterile air of the lab, a sharp contrast to the oppressive atmosphere outside. Lyra was standing in front of the core, her hands hovering over its surface, her violet eyes locked onto the pulsing lights that danced within its depths. She looked different. Her face was drawn, her features more intense than I had ever seen them. It was as if the core had taken over, pulling her into its orbit, and she couldn't escape. I hesitated, not sure if I should interrupt her. But then she spoke, her voice softer than usual, as though she knew I was there without having to turn around. "You got the message, didn't you?" she asked, her back still turned to me, her hands still suspended in midair, as though they were unwilling to touch the core again. "Yeah," I said, my voice strained. "And it's not exactly comforting." She turned to face me, and there was something almost lost in her gaze, something that hadn't been there before. The confident, authoritative woman I had met when I first arrived had faded, replaced by someone vulnerable, fragile. "I knew it would come to this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The core isn't just a tool, Michael. It's a weapon designed by my people to control the very fabric of space and time. We were meant to use it to change the course of history, to reshape the galaxy. But we lost control of it. And now it's calling to me." I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped closer. "What do you mean calling to you? What does that mean for you?" "For us." Lyra looked at me with a pained expression, her eyes flickering with an intensity one couldn't ignore. "The core has a consciousness of its own. It chooses. It has chosen me because of my bloodline. I'm the descendant of the architects who created it. I'm the key to unlocking its full power. And I'm the only one who can stop it before it's too late." The gravity of her words hit me like a freight train. I had suspected that there was more to this than just a research mission, but I had no idea how deep this went. "Stop it," I repeated, my mind struggling to keep up. "Why would you need to stop it? You've been trying to activate it this whole time. You've been unlocking its power." Her face fell, and she turned away from me again, her hands clenched at her sides. "I thought I could control it," she whispered. "I thought I could use its power to help my people, to save us from the devastation we left behind. But I was wrong. It's too powerful, too unpredictable. If we don't stop it, it will consume everything. It will tear apart the very fabric of reality." I stepped forward, my heart racing. "So what do we do now?" She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know. I thought I had all the answers. But now, I don't know if we can even stop it." I reached out to her, a strange sense of connection pulling me toward her. I couldn't just stand there and let her face this alone. "Lyra, we'll figure it out. Together. I don't know everything about this, but I know you're not alone in this fight. We'll find a way to stop it." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, she seemed to let her guard down completely. She took a shaky breath, and in that moment, I saw the woman beneath the alien exterior, the vulnerability, the fear, and the hope that had been buried beneath layers of self-imposed isolation. "Thank you, Michael. I don't know what I'd do without you." The sincerity in her voice hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how deeply I had become involved in her story, in her mission. I had come here as a delivery man, a simple cargo pilot. And now I was caught in something far larger, something that threatened not only the fate of the galaxy, but the woman I had come to care about in a way I couldn't yet understand. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice firm with resolve. We'll stop this. Together. Chapter 4, The Final Choice. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Lyra and I, along with the research team, worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase. The core's power was growing exponentially, and the station's systems were beginning to fail as the energy output from the core spiked. The station trembled under the strain, lights flickering and alarms blaring as the gravity of the situation sank in. We were running out of time. Lyra had opened the door to the core's deepest chamber, revealing the heart of the alien technology, a glowing, pulsating mass of energy that seemed to breathe with an unnatural rhythm. It was beautiful in its own way, but terrifying too. The power it radiated was palpable, like a living thing, a creature that had been awakened from a long slumber and was now hungry for more. Lyra stood before it, her hands raised in front of her, as though she were preparing to make contact once more. But this time, she wasn't sure if she could control it. "We have to act now," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The core's energy is reaching critical levels. If we don't shut it down, it will reach out beyond the station. It could destroy everything." The research team was working furiously at the control panels, but their efforts seemed futile against the overwhelming power emanating from the core. The station's systems were barely holding together, and even Lyra, who had spent her life studying this technology, seemed to be at a loss. "Lyra, you have to make a choice," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You're the key. You're the only one who can stop this." She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I know," she whispered. "But what if the choice is too much? What if stopping the core means the end of everything I've worked for? What if I destroy the only chance my people have left?" I stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'll be here. You don't have to carry this alone." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The alarms, the flashing lights, the impending disaster, it all disappeared in the space between us. In that instant, I knew what had to be done. The core was more than just a tool. It was a weapon, one that could either save or destroy everything. And Lyra, for all her strength, was the one who had the power to decide which it would be. Lyra took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the control panel. "I'm doing it," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm stopping it. For everyone." The room seemed to hold its breath as Lyra activated the shutdown sequence. The core's pulsating light flickered, then dimmed, as the energy began to dissipate. For a long moment, nothing happened. The station held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion, the catastrophic failure of the core. But then, slowly, the lights in the station steadied. The alarms ceased. The air became still. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "We stopped it." I stepped closer to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "We did it," I echoed, the weight of what we had just accomplished settling in. But as the lights of the station flickered back on, I couldn't help but wonder, what had we really unleashed? The core had been shut down, but the knowledge it held, the power it had given Lyra, was something that could never be erased. We had made a choice that had saved the station, the galaxy, and ourselves. But as Lyra looked at me, her eyes once again filled with that quiet vulnerability, I knew that the journey wasn't over. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next with her by my side. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, her voice trembling. "You saved us." I smiled, my heart full. We saved each other. And together, we walked toward the future, whatever it held, knowing that we had made a choice that would change everything.